October 2nd, 1985. In a dim hospital room in Beverly Hills, Rock Hudson took his final breath. Once hailed as the most desirable man in America, he died alone, no family, no lover, no grand farewell. But on the nightstand beside him, there was a sealed envelope. No recipient, no address, just a trembling signature jar. Rumors spread like wildfire. Nurses whispered. A close friend said he wrote that letter for someone, but couldn't bring himself to name them. Who was this man? Hudson couldn't name, not even at the end of his life. And what secret did that letter carry? For decades, Rock Hudson played the perfect Hollywood leading man. Strong, masculine, heterosexual, behind closed doors. He was something else entirely, a man torn between the love he felt and the life he was forced to fake. But that letter hidden, undelivered, was perhaps the only moment he allowed the world a glimpse of his truth. One final confession, inked in trembling regret. To understand why Rock Hudson died with a name still trapped inside his heart, we must go back to where it had all began, to a boy named Roy, and a life that was never truly his to live. Before he became Rock Hudson, he was Roy Harold Scherer Jr., a shy, stuttering boy born on November 17, 1925, in Winnetka, Illinois. His father, a struggling auto mechanic, abandoned the family during the Great Depression, leaving young Roy to be raised by a distant stepfather and a mother whose warmth faded with every unpaid bill. The boy learned early that silence was safer than truth. At school, Roy stood out not for charisma or charm, but for his towering height and deep, somber eyes. Teachers noted he rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when he did, his stutter betrayed a vulnerability that other boys mocked. But there was something else about Roy, something quieter, unspoken. He watched people more than he talked to them, and in his gaze there was a longing that went beyond words. Movies became his only escape. He'd sit alone in the dark theater, mesmerized by the elegance of Cary Grant, the power of Clark Gable, the untouchable cool of Gary Cooper. Not just envious, entranced. He didn't just want to be them. He wanted to be seen the way they were seen, admired, desired, believed. After high school, Roy worked as a mail carrier and served briefly in the Navy during World War II, but the call of Hollywood was too loud to ignore. In 1947, he packed up and moved west. He had no training, no connections, not even confidence, but he had a face. That face, an agent took one look at him and said, "You look like a statue, but if we can just make you move like a man, we might have something." His stutter was a problem. So was his soft demeanor, but they could fix that. They changed his name, gave him voice lessons, coached him to walk and talk like the kind of man America fantasized about. And just like that, Roy Scherer vanished. Rock Hudson was born. He was no longer allowed to be awkward, no longer allowed to be uncertain, and absolutely never allowed to be different. But even as the studios sculpted him into America's dream man, that shy boy from Winnetka never really disappeared. He just learned to hide better. Rock Hudson's ascent wasn't sudden, it was manufactured. Moment by moment, like a sculpture carved from stone. Universal Pictures invested heavily in their newest leading man. Publicists rewrote his backstory. Acting coaches drilled out his stutter. He was told how to smile, when to laugh, even how to stand. In 1954, the work paid off. Rock starred in Magnificent Obsession, playing a reckless playboy turned spiritual savior. Critics were surprised. Audiences were captivated. Hudson was no longer just a handsome face, he was a box office draw. And suddenly, the studios couldn't get enough of him. A year later, All That Heaven Allows cemented his heartthrob status. He played opposite Jane Wyman in a story of forbidden love between a wealthy widow and a younger man. The parallels to his own life were eerie love, judged and rejected by society, on screen. He made women swoon, off screen. He couldn't even hold a man's hand in public. By 1956, he was nominated for an Academy Award for Giant, acting alongside Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean. The film was a cultural event. It wasn't just a movie, it was a declaration that Rock Hudson had arrived. He was now the image of American masculinity, tall, rugged, commanding. Magazines labeled him the most handsome man in the world. Fan clubs formed. Teen girls mailed him locks of hair. Middle-aged women proposed marriage by letter. Photographers begged to capture him in his signature white tuxedo smile. But there was one thing no one ever saw: his loneliness. Because Rock Hudson was living a lie. In reality, his relationships were fleeting, hidden, or staged. Rumors swirled, but the studios worked tirelessly to protect his image. His agent arranged a short-lived marriage in 1955 to Phyllis Gates, his secretary, in what many believe was a publicity stunt designed to silence the whispers. Phyllis later claimed she didn't know Rock was gay when they married, but in a private confrontation recorded on tape she once asked, "Why don't you admit to yourself you're that way?" Rock replied with silence. That silence would follow him for decades. His fame gave him everything: fortune, fans, the freedom to travel anywhere in the world. But it also took something. It took away the right to be honest, the right to love openly, the right to say a name. And through it all, he kept up the performance. Even when his eyes softened around certain co-stars, even when he disappeared for weekends with friends whose names were never printed, even when his heart broke in silence. The camera never blinked, neither did he. But behind every flashbulb, behind every red carpet smile, Rock Hudson was carrying a secret too heavy to bear forever. He met him sometime in the early 1950s, before Giant, before the marriage, before the fear calcified into routine. The man whose name will not appear in any tabloid or official biography was an actor too, but less famous, handsome, fiercely intelligent, and unafraid in ways Rock could never be. They met, as so many forbidden things do, at a party behind closed gates in the Hollywood Hills. The air smelled like cigarette smoke and expensive cologne. Conversations were hushed. Men lingered too long in doorways, exchanged glances too quickly, but in a corner, over a glass of scotch, Rock and the man who would haunt him shared a laugh that felt real. The connection was instant and dangerous. They became inseparable in private weekend trips up the coast, shared hideaways in Palm Springs, handwritten notes left in each other's trailers. Friends whispered. Studio heads watched. Rock had been warned, "Yo, you're too valuable to lose over this." So he learned to compartmentalize. Publicly, he posed beside leading ladies. Privately, he loved a man he could never take to dinner in Beverly Hills. There's a story that circulates quietly among those who knew Rock well. One night, after a few drinks, his lover asked, half joking, "Would you ever marry me?" Rock didn't laugh. He paused, looked away, then said softly, "I can't even say your name out loud. What makes you think I could say I do?" It was meant to be a joke, but it wasn't. That moment marked a slow unraveling. They tried to keep it alive, meeting in secret, avoiding paparazzi, even considering a move to Europe. But the pressure was relentless. Rock was now a household name, and the more famous he became, the more invisible his private self had to become. They drifted, not with a fight, but with the kind of aching silence that comes when love meets reality. The man moved on. He dated others. Rock buried himself in work. But he never forgot. Years later, a friend of Rock's found him looking at an old black and white photo, a candid shot of the two of them on a beach. The friend asked who it was. Rock didn't answer. He just smiled, tucked the photo back into the book, and said, "No one you'd know." He carried that silence for decades. In the early 1980s, as the AIDS epidemic began to cast its shadow, Rock's health started to decline. At first, he blamed it on exhaustion, then on pneumonia, but he knew. The doctors confirmed what he already suspected. The disease had no cure. He withdrew from the spotlight. Friends noticed the weight loss, the gaunt cheeks. Still, he kept working, filming Dynasty with Linda Evans, whose on-screen kiss with him became national news when the diagnosis was revealed. America was stunned. The heartthrob of the 50s was the first celebrity face of a terrifying new illness. But in the midst of the media frenzy, lawsuits, and hospital visits, Rock did something few knew about. He wrote a letter. It wasn't addressed. There was no salutation, no envelope, just a few pages, folded neatly, with his signature at the bottom. In the letter, he spoke not of illness or regret, but of love, a kind of love he said he never allowed himself to live fully. He described a man with laugh lines that made me jealous and eyes that never looked away when I was afraid. He confessed that he had spent decades chasing the approval of strangers, all while denying the only approval that mattered, his own. One line stood out, haunting in its simplicity. If I had said yes when you asked, maybe I would have never had to write this. The letter was found by his nurse, tucked between a book and a pair of reading glasses. No one knew who it was meant for. No one dared ask. Some believed it was for Mark Christian, his final partner, who would later sue Hudson's estate. But those closest to Rock said no. Mark was there at the end. But the man in the letter, he came before all of it. There was speculation. A few insiders whispered James Dean, citing their time on Giant and their off-screen chemistry. Others suspected Tab Hunter, who had his own stories of studio suppression and hidden lovers. But Rock never confirmed anything. Not in interviews, not in his will, only in that letter unsigned, unmailed, unread by the world did he ever let it out. The man it was meant for, he never came forward. Maybe he never saw it. Maybe he did, and chose the same silence Rock had lived with. Maybe he, too, had a box of photos, tucked away, labeled with nothing at all. But in those final lines, Rock asked for something he never dared to request in life. I know I hurt you. I know I was afraid. But if this letter finds you, please, just know I loved you. And below that, scrawled in uneven handwriting, a single word had been written, then crossed out. A name, forever hidden. The revelation of Rock Hudson's illness in 1985. Bob didn't just shake Hollywood, it shattered it. And America wasn't ready to associate AIDS with its golden boy. Overnight, Rock's name was no longer whispered with desire, it was spoken with fear, confusion, and in some corners, judgment. Headlines shifted from admiration to speculation. How did he get it? Who else might be infected? Could it have been prevented? For Rock, the price of silence had come due. Behind closed doors, he had lived a life carefully edited by studios, managers, and gossip columnists. He played the roles given to him, both on-screen and off. But now, stripped of control, his illness forced a public reckoning not just with his image, but with what that image had concealed for decades. Some of his fans felt betrayed. To them, he had been the ultimate man's man, invulnerable, heroic, heterosexual. But now, confronted with the truth, many struggled to reconcile the myth with the man. The letters poured in, some hateful, some mournful, some simply confused. The mask had finally fallen, and behind it was a person more fragile and more human than they had ever imagined. Elizabeth Taylor was one of the first to speak out. She called the media's cruelty shameful. Rock was brave, she said, not because he fought a disease, but because he dared to be real, at least in the end. Doris Day, his longtime friend, stayed silent for weeks before issuing a short but heartbreaking statement. He was the kindest man I ever knew. I wish he hadn't had to hide. The impact rippled far beyond Hollywood. Rock Hudson became the first major public figure linked to AIDS. In that moment, he put a face to a crisis the government had long ignored. Funding for research increased almost immediately after his death. Activists finally had a name the world recognized, a name that forced people to pay attention. But for Rock himself, the damage had long been done. His career never truly recovered from the rumors that preceded his illness. Scripts stopped arriving. Producers grew nervous. The man who once carried studios on his back was now treated like a liability. In his final years, he was seen less as a legend and more as a cautionary tale, an icon too wrapped in secrecy to be allowed a graceful exit. And yet, amid all that fallout, he remained composed, quiet, gentle. Those who visited him in his final weeks said he never complained, never lashed out. He would sit by the window, sipping tea, watching the sun melt into the California hills. What few understood was that Rock's greatest grief wasn't the illness or the loss of fame. It was the love he let slip away, a love he never fought for, a love he only named once in a letter no one was meant to see. Because in the end, for all his films, awards, and fame, Rock Hudson's most lasting legacy wasn't his on-screen kiss or his Hollywood charm. It was the silent scream of a man who lived a lie so well, the truth nearly died with him. In the final weeks of his life, Rock Hudson moved into a quiet suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel. It was the same building where, decades earlier, he'd attended glittering premieres and danced with actresses under crystal chandeliers. Now, those same hallways echoed only with soft footsteps and whispered regrets. He no longer had the strength to walk far. A nurse helped him dress. Friends came in brief visits, always smiling too much, speaking too softly, like grief had already entered the room before they did. Mark Christian, his last partner, stayed near, but their relationship had frayed under the weight of secrets and illness. And still, Rock remained calm, distant, almost serene. One visitor recalled how he stared out the window for hours, mumbling fragments of a poem no one could recognize. He didn't talk about movies, or fame, or fear. He talked about him, never by name. Just stories a weekend in Big Sur, a song they used to dance to in private. The way he once said, "I'd wait 100 years if you needed me to." Rock never said if they'd spoken again. Perhaps he didn't know where he was. Perhaps the man had already died. Or perhaps, most tragically of all, he was still alive, somewhere, unaware that the man who once loved him was saying goodbye in silence. Shortly before his death, Rock gave a private donation to an AIDS research foundation. No press, no statement, just a single note attached. Do something good with this. Do it for those who can't speak yet. When he passed on October 2nd, 1985, his funeral was modest. No red carpet, no cameras allowed. Elizabeth Taylor cried quietly. Doris Day didn't attend. She said she preferred to remember him laughing. No public mention was ever made of the letter. No one claimed to have received it. It remained in a sealed folder, among other personal effects, later archived by his estate. But those who knew him said that, in his final days, Rock seemed lighter, like something long buried had been set free. Maybe the letter had done what he couldn't. Maybe, at last, he had said the name. Rock Hudson lived a life that millions admired, yet few truly knew. Beneath the tailored suits, the camera flashes, and the carefully rehearsed charm, there was simply a man who wanted to love and be loved without fear. He never got that chance, not fully, not publicly. But maybe his final letter wasn't just for one man. Maybe it was for all of us, for anyone who's ever hidden, waited, or stayed silent too long. And now we ask you, if someone wrote you a letter like that, what would you say back? If you've ever loved in silence or been the one left wondering, share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. And if Rock Hudson's truth moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us as we uncover the stories Hollywood tried to erase.